The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents Preparing for Debate. So I'm often asked, how is it that you do what you do? And I have to keep reminding people that I don't remotely think I'm special. I also don't think I'm a clueless buffoon who doesn't have any talent for this. I've been doing it for a while. But I didn't become a preacher when I thought I was supposed to because I was terrified of public speaking. That's clearly not a problem anymore. And the secret for any of those who might also feel that they're terrified of public speaking is this: be willing to say you don't know, and don't talk about shit you don't know anything about. That makes it easy. If you're not trying to BS people, if you're just sincerely talking about what you understand and why, and questioning why you should accept their position, there's absolutely nothing to be nervous about. Debates also take some practice and preparation. You know, I would hope that I'm better at it today than the first one that I did. Maybe not, who knows? I've talked to people who watched a lot of them. But when it comes to preparation, the thing that seems to confuse some people is, oh, I watch you on the TV show and I see you in debates and you seem to be ready at all times within an instant to provide an explanation or a response to whatever comes up. Well, that's not true. I have been caught off guard, I've been confused, I have made tons and tons of errors, but the reason that people have that perception is because I've done a lot of this. The more you do, the better you're going to get at it. The last debate that I did, or the most recent before this video, was in Dallas, Texas, at the Bible and Beer Consortium, which still makes me giggle, because my fundamentalist Christian parents would have never gone to anything that was Bible and beer. My Catholic friends would have. But the debate was whether or not Jesus rose from the dead. And I want to talk about a little bit about how I prepared for that, and then the upcoming debate and what I did for that. And hopefully this will give some insight into how I look at things, and may give people ideas about how they might be able to look at it too. So the first thing you need to do is be a Christian for about 25 or so years, think that you have a calling to the ministry, study serious. No, you don't have to do all that. And I'll point out that you also don't have to be an expert in deep philosophical topics. It can help, but here's the dirty little secret. Sophisticated theology is just as much garbage as unsophisticated theology. They just use obfuscating language. And so, how many times have you had a conversation with somebody in your family or a friend of yours who's religious, and they say something along the lines of, well, I don't really understand it, but you know, my pastor does, this expert theologian over here does, and you really need to study it in the original Greek or Hebrew to get a good understanding of it. And plus there's this philosophical argument. Let me tell you, philosophical arguments are cool. I like philosophy. But when it comes to proving that a God exists or something in the realm of supernatural, they all will fail and must fail because they don't seem to recognize that we are currently blocked from any sort of epistemologically sound empirical verification of the supernatural. And so one of the keys is to pay attention to what's actually said. I had previously read Josh McDowell's Evidence That Demands a Verdict. I'm sure that some people here are familiar with that. It was passed around at my church as if it was Bible Volume 2. And it is incredibly convincing and compelling to people who already believe and don't read any other books. If you actually go through and research to find out how accurate Josh was, has he made any mistakes, what does his argument actually boil down to, you'll find out that Evidence That Demands a Verdict, including Evidence That Demands a Verdict, or the new Evidence That Demands a Verdict, and all the updated ones, aren't any good. And you can go to infidels.org, which is a great resource where a bunch of really brilliant people have gone through and written articles about everything, and there is almost a chapter-by-chapter breakdown of Josh's entire work exposing the problems. But I read it as a Christian, and I read the parts relevant to the resurrection again a month ago. And then I went out and I watched several debates on the resurrection between theists and atheists. But I didn't just start the debate and let it play and listen and then go about my work. Instead, I don't ever want to just be parroting somebody else, because that's what my opposition tends to do. I want to actually understand it. So what I did was I watched a debate, or part of a debate, I watched the opening statement, to see what these 5 Christian apologists brought forward as their arguments and best evidence for the resurrection. and I wrote them down. And the closer you can get to writing an actual logical syllogism, the better. But you can still do it in, everyday language, because that's the way they're going to be presented in a debate. And then I went through and read what I had written down. What is the argument? Let me go piece by piece, because there's something that I learned in dealing with the very popular Kalam cosmological argument. For those who aren't familiar, this is an argument that basically everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause for its existence. That's the whole argument, and yet William Lane Craig presents it almost exclusively every time he argues for the existence of God. Here's the problem. The conclusion is not, therefore there is a God. The conclusion of the argument is, therefore the universe had a cause for its existence. That's the final argument, that's the conclusion from the Kalam. Which means it doesn't in any way support what he's actually there to defend. He has to add something else to it. That's the first realization. It lets you just dismiss that. The second one is that the second premise, the universe began to exist, isn't necessarily the case, as Sean Carroll and other physicists have pointed out, that while local space-time may have begun to exist, it may be wrong to extend this to space-time or a universe or a multiverse, etc. in general. So we don't know. So we're stuck with an I don't know for the second. But the first premise, everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence, that's really weirdly phrased, isn't it? Everything that begins to exist. Is there anything that didn't begin to exist? Well, why would we have that language at all? And it's because the previous versions of that argument began with everything has a cause for its existence, and somebody said, what about God? Oh, well, let's see, God didn't begin to exist, so only those things that come into existence have causes. That allows you to figure out exactly what it is that they're doing. So I listened to several debates, and one of the most common ways to defend this idea that Jesus rose from the dead comes from Gary Habermas and others, and it is usually referred to as the minimal facts approach. So I did an entire 30-minute video talking about all of the problems that I found with the minimal facts approach, and I put it up online as part of this project. And then before the debate, I actually contacted my debate opponent, which in this case was Blake Junta, and we're friendly, and I said, here's my take on minimal facts, just in case you're going that route. Wait a minute. Yeah, he's ducking me in. Yeah. But he has a very formulaic approach to it, and it is, I think the best way to describe it is, he is debate team debater. This is what I need to do to win. And he'll get up there and say it. In order for my opponent to win, he must do A, B, C, and D, and then blah, blah, blah. I don't care about that. I'm not here to win points. I'm here to help change minds. So I listened to those debates, and then I listened to what the atheists, or the people who rejected the resurrection, because they weren't all atheists, had to say, what their objections were. Made a list of the things that I thought were good, things I thought I might have a better take on. Read through Josh McDowell's book. Then I spent weeks just thinking about it. Driving around, doing work in the yard, whatever. It's like, hey, what about this? Most of the time when I say, hey, what about this? And I say it, by the way, I also tend to say it out loud and talk to myself, which disturbs some people. But I have found that it engages different parts of the brain. It helps me remember things better, and it sounds different. Because the way something feels when I'm just thinking about it is very different from the way it feels once it's coming back into my ears. Don't know why, but I do it. So I try to find a way to defend my opponent's position. How would I defend the resurrection? I really can't, but I try to find the best way that I could. I try to poke holes in their position. I try to poke holes in my own position. And then one of the things I try to do is figure out what it would be that would change my mind. Now, I have a standard answer that I came up with after years of doing this for what would change your mind about the existence of God. And my answer is, I don't know. But if there's a God, that God should know exactly what should change my mind, should be capable of implementing that which would change my mind, and has not done so, which means that God either doesn't exist or doesn't want me to know it exists. Either way, it's not my problem. That is, and actually I talked to Lawrence Krauss about this, because there are a lot of atheists who will give glib answers, writing in the sky that appears on. Well, how did you determine that was actually a God and not just a really advanced technology? Yeah. But it doesn't matter, because that doesn't happen either, just like healing amputees doesn't happen. I was sitting there having a debate review with Blake Junta recently, and we talked about, imagine we're in this room and we know nothing about anything outside the room and we have no way to investigate it. What you're doing is you're telling me that you believe something about what's outside of this room, and I want to know how. And it was great, because Blake said, well, let's say I believe there's a telepathic, telekinetic person who lives on the other side of that wall. Great example. How do we test that? Well, I would get message from him about what he was getting ready to do, and then he would float things around the room. Perfect! That's a start. It may not necessarily convince me of your conclusion, but it's a start. Do you have any evidence of anything like that for the God that you believe in? Well, you know, there's the cosmological argument, and no, that is not shit moving around a room. That is philosophers going, how can I make this so that it looks like there's a God? Because that's the true thing that's happened with arguments. There's nothing new. It's not a truly new, there might be a new version of an old argument because this one fell out of favor and somebody dusted it off and brought it back. There's nothing really new about there. So after I try to find flaws in the argument, I write them down. Again, not just what I heard each of these individuals say. I try to write down what I think are the best arguments for and against, and then go through them line by line to see if I made a mistake, like the, you know, everything that begins to exist. Hey, why is that word here? It's a very nitpicky, pedantic process, but it helps. Because I've gone over this stuff so much, plus I've been doing the TV show for 12 years and was a Christian for 25 plus years before that, that it's unlikely that I'm going to be surprised by something. But that's the next step. Try to plan for what happens when you're presented with something that you didn't think of. Because it's going to happen. None of us are perfect thinkers, none of us are, and even if you were a perfect thinker, if you're up against somebody who's an imperfect thinker, I don't know that you can anticipate what's going to come out of their mouth. You may not be able to plan. How do you plan for what you aren't expecting? That seems to flummox a lot of people. Hey, how can I plan? You know, that'd be like expecting the unexpected. Yeah. You're not expecting this specific thing, otherwise it would be expected. Thinking about how you're going to react. What kind of tone and tenor are you going to have in this debate? I think you would, on the TV show, you might find this on occasion where I have been the one who gets antagonistic first. I don't think you will find a single formal debate where I don't know, you might not even find one where I got particularly heated, but certainly never first. And when I'm presented with something that that's unfamiliar to me, I know what my reaction is going to be. I don't know. Let me think about that and get back to you. Did I lose the debate just then? Not to anybody who matters. If somebody thinks you lost a debate because you said, I don't know, they don't understand what's going on. I did 4 nights of debate, or 3 nights of debate at Church of Christ in San Antonio. Also a place you won't find stained glass. Church of Christ doesn't allow stained glass.
Or musical instruments.
Or musical instruments, which was painful, but I've told that story before. And they were frustrated by the 3rd night because they said, we keep asking Matt questions, and he keeps saying, I don't know. Because that's the answer. I mean, that's my answer. You're the one who's saying you do know, and you have the burden of proof to demonstrate how you know this, and that's all I'm asking you. I am unconvinced that your position is correct. Convince me. Oh, no, because the expectation is a theist and an atheist walk into a debate. The theist says God exists, the atheist says no gods exist, let's go. It's not a WWE event. The theist and an atheist walk into a debate, the theist says God exists, and the atheist says prove it. That's the debate. So when you hear something unexpected during the debate, take notes, write it down. Now I know most of you, by the way, just for my own kicks, anybody planning to do public formal debates? Herb and Ed, raise their hand. This can happen one-on-one as well. How many times have you been in a conversation with a family member? It's generally considered rude to interrupt, which is why debates have a structured format. Although I don't think it's as rude as some people think. It depends on how it's done. But one of the things you can do is jot down a note. Shouldn't be waiting for your turn to speak. You should be actually listening. You should be trying to understand what they're saying. You should be trying to prepare a response, but not a reactive response. And so jot down what they've said, and then ask them a question about it later. You can have an entire conversation with someone without ever using a statement. You can just keep asking questions. It can get annoying if you don't change the questions. If you listen to like Scientific Rudincate, it's like, how do you know that? How do you know that? How do you know that? Okay, or the little kid is like, well, how do you know that? But if you're actually asking sincere questions because you want to understand, and because you're not convinced of what they're convinced of, and you're looking for the best way to talk them out of it, asking questions is the best tool. look at the arguments and see if they're comparable to some other argument that you've already heard. Because odds are, if you're in a debate about the existence of God, the argument they're going to present is some version of something that has been hashed out for centuries. But they probably haven't formed it in that way, especially if they're a competent street preacher. When Cliff Connectley and I debate, we've done it twice, he's no notes up here, and he's teaching his sermon, and he's telling you, but he's making arguments. And the advantage that I have in that debate is that I've studied this stuff long enough that I immediately know, usually from the first few words of what he's saying, it's this argument. Then I get to explain that argument, point out what's wrong with it, and then all the colorful text and animation that he threw into it to make it more appealing crumbles away. Because that's the emotional appeal. But there's an element of theater to debate. You have to be able to connect with an audience. It's not just who has the best argument. Otherwise, science would be done by debating. And that's not how we do science. And scientists aren't necessarily the best people for debates. So in the case of this resurrection debate, Blake's argument was essentially the author of Luke and Acts, which is sometimes just called Luke Acts, who Blake identified as Fred, is reliable. He's a good witness. He interviewed eyewitnesses. And so Fred, which is the name we substituted for the author of Luke Acts, can be trusted. And therefore, when he talks about the resurrection, we can trust that too. Now, the bad part of this is that when I went through to list the things that would change my mind, I also made a list of things that wouldn't possibly change my mind. One is mere testimonial evidence. I don't care if you have an eyewitness that you could drag through time and plant in front of me to say, I watched Jesus walk out of the tomb and raised bodily into heaven. I've seen Chris Angel walk on water. I've done magic tricks for people where they accused me of having satanic powers and ran from the room. Eyewitness testimony isn't reliable, and it can't confirm this. And so if the entire story is this, how do we address Blake's argument? Well, one of the things that I wanted to do, but didn't quite do, I did it briefly in the opening. Why do we call him Fred? Why do we call the author of Luke Acts Fred? Because we don't know who it is. I think that's a pretty big deal. We have no idea who the person is who wrote this. We can't interview him. It was thousands of years ago. If there were people who came up and said, hey, I was just abducted by aliens, I wouldn't believe them. I would believe that they experienced something and that they were probably trying to honestly relay that, but I don't believe their explanation. It doesn't get more believable when we move them back in time 2,000 years and have some anonymous person tell us that they said that. It gets less believable. And that was the entire structure of his argument. In this case, what I presented going in was a version of a deconstruction of the minimal facts approach, talked about the problems with eyewitness accounts, talked about, yes?
You mentioned the minimal facts approach
Right.
twice. Could you tell me what it is?
Yeah, I've done a previous video on it. The minimal facts approach is basically, this happened, this happened, this happened, and this happened. These are undisputed. Even the most skeptical historians agree to these 4 facts. So what is the best explanation for these facts? And their claim is that the best explanation for, people reported that they saw Jesus afterwards, people converted from other religions, Christianity grew. The best explanation for those facts is that Jesus actually did rise from the dead. That's the whole minimal facts approach. But the plan was to teach something about fallacies and how we think and how we get things wrong. Expose problems in the typical case, the minimal facts approach. Expose problems in the Gospels, make a list of questions to ask him, and have alternate questions based on the answers I get, because I'm not creating a flow chart where I know exactly where my opponent's going to end up. It's more of a tree branching thing, where it's the question that Herbert asked, would you do anything differently with respect to morals if you didn't believe in God? That comes up. What would change your mind comes up. If Joe told you he was abducted by aliens, would you believe him? Why don't you accept the Mormon tradition? I mean, if you're going to claim that Luke Acts author is reliable, how do you reject the Mormon account? Because now this becomes an argument not about the reliability of an author, but it becomes an appeal to what has become canonized text, what has become official within your religion, and that makes the whole argument circular. I don't rehearse the debates or the openings. I don't even tend to write everything out. I don't have anything written or everything written out here. I just have an outline. And that allows it to be more freeform. And generally, that tends to be received more positively. Now this isn't going to make much difference if you're talking with your relatives and friends, because if you show up with a Mom, here's the speech I wrote for you about how you're wrong. You definitely shouldn't do that. You might be able to do that at a convention where your mom happens to be sitting, but that's it. About a week before the debate, I stopped thinking about it. You know, I don't want to beat it to death in my head. And then a day or so before I go up, I rehash whatever notes I have, because now I got kind of fresh eyes and did you make a mistake? And then I'm done with it. And the day of the debate, I'll do anything else. Usually it's drive to Dallas or fly to wherever I'm doing the debate. And I don't think about it until we're getting ready to walk up on stage. And then I have to rely on the work that I've done. Now there are people who say, oh, debates aren't for me. Cool, that's fine. But don't think debates aren't for you just because you're not immediately comfortable with it. Like I said, I was terrified of public speaking. It's a skill set that you develop. It is about training, it's about learning. It is just like trying to get a degree or get a certificate or anything else. You have to actually do the work. The big thing is to actually care. There's a reason why organizations like Bible and Beer Consortium are happier when I come to debate than perhaps some other people. Because some people enter a debate with the goal of making the opposition look stupid. Let me score cheap points, let me get a win. I don't care who thinks I won or lost any debate. That 13-year-old girl, that guy who came up after the last one, the people who email, who've changed their mind, the people who are Christians who've never met an atheist who could defend their beliefs and now leave there confounded because they've just seen somebody who seems reasonable and not a complete asshole most of the time, defend what they believe and expose things and ask the very questions that they've secretly been asking themselves for years, and they go to their pastor and their preacher and they're like, oh, don't worry, God will explain everything when you get to heaven. That's not an answer. That doesn't help at all. And when they see somebody up there doing that, I was a skeptic for years before I was an atheist. And it's Penn and Teller who kind of gave me permission to be an atheist because they used the term. And that made it okay. Hey, yes, I'm an atheist too. That permission is what comes out in good debates. The permission to question, the permission to doubt, the permission to reevaluate things, and perhaps even change what you believe and why. The debate that's coming up on October 2nd, which I'll breeze through this because I don't want to give too much away ahead of time, is with Matt Slick. And he's called into this TV show once upon a time. He has a radio show. He's a Calvinist apologist. I also debated him on a program called the Bible Thumping Wingnut. It's an online video thing where we did this whole debate because he had invented something he called the Dillahunty fallacy, which wasn't a fallacy, and I went on to point out why it wasn't a fallacy. And then after we did this debate and I left, they then spent the next hour talking shit about me, which was funny because while I don't look at debates as win or lose, I'm pretty sure if you spend an hour afterwards talking shit about the person you were debating, you lost. Yeah. The first debate we did, he presented the transcendental argument for the existence of God, and I pointed out what the problems were. And then he went back to his website and changed it, but he didn't understand what the problems were, so he actually made it worse. And this Dillahunty fallacy thing comes from, his whole argument was everything is either physical or conceptual. Those are the only options. That is a true dichotomy, physical or conceptual. And I said, no, it's not. Physical, non-physical, that's a true dichotomy. Conceptual, non-conceptual, that's true dichotomy. But you have to demonstrate that non-physical and conceptual are exactly the same. Well, what's the third option? And I couldn't come up with a label for the third option. Spoiler, it's right there in the title of his argument, transcendental. The transcendental argument for the existence of God, non-physical, non-conceptual, transcendental. Doesn't matter. But because I said neither, because I didn't have a name for the middle position, he argued that I was committing a fallacy of arguing for a third position that I couldn't identify. And then somebody went on his forum and said, hey Matt, they asked the question I wish I would have asked on air because this would have all been over. Is your God physical or conceptual? And he said, neither. Which means I won, but I didn't really take it that way. So the question coming up October 2nd is secular humanism superior to Christianity? Matt is so frustrated by me saying I don't know, or me defending a weak atheist, soft atheist, non-theistic position, because I want to put the burden of proof where it rests on people claiming that a God's there. He's like, I'm only going to do this debate if we can get Matt to defend a positive claim. And so he sent me a list of proposed debate topics, and they were awful. I posted them on Facebook and pointed out all the problems. None of them were true dichotomies, which means he hasn't learned anything about dichotomies in the last 5 years. But it was clear what he wanted to do. He wanted me to defend what I believe. And since I push for people to defend what they believe, I said, okay, let's do, is secular humanism superior to Christianity? Because I suspect I will say yes, and Matt will say no. And even though it becomes a simple question, and I do say yes, and I can't wait to defend this, and my goal has nothing to do with the debate. This is a weird position for me, because the debate is only a vehicle for me to do one thing: write the best 30-minute opening introduction to secular humanism that I can, so that that video gets yanked out of the debate and posted everywhere to show secular humanism is clearly superior to Christianity. By the way, even if there is a God. Because as I've said before, if it turns out there's a God and he's not a secular humanist, fuck him. I don't want anything to do with it. But I did something else in preparation for this debate. I called Matt Slick on the phone, actually. I asked him to call me. And I'll wrap this up here in a minute. But we have this history, and it's not a particularly good one. But I had watched a debate that he'd done with another Christian. They were debating free will versus election. So he's a Calvinist who believes that there are the elect people and God converts them. And the guy he's debating thinks that choosing to follow God is an act of free will. So they had this debate. It's probably my favorite debate I've ever watched. Matt was treated horribly by the audience. Horribly. And the audience seemed to be overwhelmingly full of people who did not understand doctrine in the slightest. And they would attack him because he would say something like, I'm the biggest sinner I know. And in their mind, once you're saved, you're not a sinner anymore. And in Matt's mind, yeah, I'm still a sinner. They didn't understand this simple doctrine, which I understood. And I'm betting that a good chunk of the people in the room understood that when Matt says he's the worst sinner he can ever imagine, his view is that when you become saved, you don't become sinless, you become blameless for your sin. And that's the difference that they couldn't get. And they beat up on him left and right. So I called him to let him know I understood it, which was really weird. Because now you have an atheist telling him, no, you weren't talking crazy. You actually got it right, or I understood what you meant. But the reason I loved the debate was this. It's two Christians. Person number one has this position. Bible verse, Bible verse, Bible verse, Bible verse. Boom, 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 boom. Every one of the verses, and I'm sitting here as an impartial observer, every verse that he cited did seem to accurately support his position. And the other guy talked. And the exact same thing happened. Verse, 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 verse. Nobody ever needs to draw up one of those crappy little contradiction charts again. Just point them to this debate and show that they can't get their story straight. They have what they think is the manual to life and everything. And both of them have reached contradictory conclusions, depending on which verses they pluck out and how they interpret it. Because, oh boy, did we get into what it says in Aramaic, and it was fun. But there was a couple of things that happened in preparation for this debate. I pointed him to Secular Humanist Manifesto, versions 1, 2, and 3, also the American Humanist Association and the International Humanist Association's statements. And then I also said, that doesn't mean I believe everything that's in there. I tend to vote Democrat. I don't agree with everything in the Democratic Party. There are things in the Republican Party platform I would agree with. There are things in the Libertarian, Green, whatever. Not as many. But just because I identify as X doesn't mean I sign on to everything that you can find that's associated with X, kind of like the comment from yesterday. So I told him, here's the thing, you can go read them, you can find out what secular humanism is about, and if you would, please give me your definition of Christianity so that I'm not arguing against a straw man. I want to show that it's superior to what you're actually defending, and not, let's say, what the Phelps family believes. After the debate's over, I tend to do reviews of them. Normally I do them myself. This time I brought Blake down from Dallas, and we did a review of our debate together. The two of us sat on the love seat in my office, me and my debate opponent, and talked about what went right, what went wrong, rehashed certain things, and I posted it. And then after that was over, we sat down and had another 90-minute conversation about methodological naturalism, which is his big objection to me. And that's where these other discussions about what's outside this room. The two of them, me and the person I debated, sitting on a love seat in my office on camera, recorded a review of the debate. And I put it out there. And I was waiting for the atheist community to come in and go, what the hell are you thinking? We're so sick of this guy. The entire month of August was Blake, is he your new boyfriend? What's going on here? Why would you let him review your debate? That's your, you should be the opposite happen. Hey, this was better than the debate. I really want to see two people sit down and have a conversation. I love the debate. I thought you guys did a good job, but this actually got to more details. And it was actually better than some of the debate reviews you've done of your own stuff. Because you're not as likely to see your own flaws. Although I have, and they're pretty bad sometimes. But so, in preparing for debates, read everything you can. Study what other people have said and done about it. Write it down. Pick it apart. Be as thorough and nitpicky as you possibly can, and then set it all aside and just let it come in and fill your head on occasion when you're doing something until you get closer to doing it. Even if you're not going to do a formal debate. If you care about changing somebody else's mind and having those conversations, you have to do the homework. You don't have to become an expert in everything. You don't have to become, an astrophysicist and have 6 PhDs and be able to discuss the finer points of philosophy and all this stuff. All you really need to do is be able to say, I don't know. Can you explain to me why you believe that? And when they deflect to these claims that, well, this scientist here says this. Okay, I can point to a bunch of scientists that say the opposite. Here's the thing. You think there's a God, right? And you think this God exists and loves me and wants me to know he exists. Why the hell do I have to become an expert in dead languages and a dozen different scientific disciplines in order to have a sound reason to believe in it? Why can't it just show up? Why isn't it just self-evident? Why is the Damascus Road experience good enough for Saul, but the rest of us have to go and learn dead languages and a bunch of interdisciplinary efforts? That makes no sense. You don't have to be an expert in anything. And the people who expect you to be an expert are normally violating their own religious beliefs. How many of them are experts? How many of their family members who were in dire need and brought out of that sinful life and raised to salvation by Jesus know anything at all about astrophysics? How many people in the history of the world have become convinced that Jesus died for their sins because of the transcendental argument for the existence of God? Zero. None. Not one ever anywhere. It's never happened. Instead, they begin with this belief and they try to structure an argument that leads to it. That's argument done backwards. It's the opposite of science. It's the opposite of what philosophy should be doing. It's all wrong. So I'm going to change debates, but I can't do it alone. Means there need to be more people involved who want to see debates done differently. So that it's not this formulaic, I talk, you talk, I talk. It's from West Wing, that's a joint press conference. It's not a debate. Do your homework, check your sources. Just because, for example, on whether or not Jesus existed as a real historical figure. There are mythicists. But there's also a couple of different categories of mythicists. There are those who are engaged in scholarly efforts who point out problems with the historical method, how historians can't actually confirm this, but they just give the benefit of the doubt that if somebody was presented as a real figure, that they were real. And then there's the mythicists who think that Christianity was invented in the 4th century by the Pope and the Masons. So be cautious about what sources you're actually using. There's no reason to take the extra step. There's no reason to overextend your position. If somebody comes in and says there is a God, it would be really dumb to say, no, there isn't, there's no gods, and I know this because Joe told me. Why not just say, how do you know that? Why should I believe that's the case? So, for the people who ask, why are you debating any of this? It's so stupid. We just proved all this long ago. People can't rise from the dead. Why would you even have that argument? Because there's a bunch of people who believe that one person at least did. Although it's actually more than one because of Lazarus and then all the Jewish zombies that marched on his, what people believe matters. And so if you care at all about changing their mind, you have to do this. Now, if you don't want to engage in those conversations, You're not a terrible atheist. You're not a terrible secularist. You're not a terrible person. I have plenty of friends who have absolutely zero interest in engaging in these conversations because they don't find them enjoyable. They haven't bothered to study and aren't particularly effective. They have better things to do with their time, and that's fine. I'm just talking about what I like to do, why I think it's valuable, and how I'm trying to get better at it by leveraging what I've learned from Ed and Herb and Frank Sindler and everybody else who I know who's been debating this stuff for years. And maybe, hopefully, tweaking it. Because if I just marched out and said the same thing that they said 20 years ago, now we're following the path that the opponents do. I've answered the same question hundreds of times on the TV show. Sometimes I give the same answer because it's the one that's got the best response. A lot of times I look for a new answer, a different answer. And I love it because somebody will email and say, you know, you answered this question on Sunday and you really should have said this. And sometimes what they suggest is something that I hadn't thought of. And sometimes what they suggest is what I've been saying for 10 years, so I know they haven't been paying attention to the show. And sometimes what they say, I actually find fault with as to why that may be better. And that prompts a discussion that gets both of us thinking so that we're all better at having these conversations. Debates aren't something to be scared of. Conversations with people should never be something to be scared of. I realize that that's not true for everybody. There are people who just cannot engage in conversations. I certainly wouldn't force anybody to do anything they're uncomfortable with. But you don't have to be the world's foremost expert. You don't have to be the quickest thinker. You don't have to be ready with a snappy comeback every time, especially in those conversations that aren't formal debates, because guess what you get to do? That's interesting. I tell you what, why don't we stick a pin in it for today? Let me go back and look into that, and we'll pick up here next time, because I'd like to have good answers to your good questions. And that's all you need. And on that note, I'll try to have good answers to your good questions. Thank you.
This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.